Wordsworth had painted his scene so vividly that Margot took it as an unequivocal sign of the cosmos to stop thinking about how beautiful it was outside and just get up to be a part of it. It was for her own good. Though she ached for a relaxing bath despite having just showered, she got dressed before she could give in to the temptation and ventured out into the world. She got as far as Brompton Cemetery. Sunlight filtered through the leaves as if to bless the sacred ground. A stone angel veiled in ivy peered over the resting place of her eternal charge, while crows sitting on nearby obelisks sharpened their black beaks on the stone. Margot sipped a chai latte from her takeaway cup as she sat on a bench of brittle wood. Her coffee shop napkin was full of epitaphs, and she'd just finished writing, "Lamented by One," all that was legible on the headstone in front of her. She wished she could read more and find out who'd been the one. A spouse, child, sibling, parent, and why only one person? This was a grand monument, but was the deceased's life so lonely that no one else grieved? Mature trees canopied the graveyard in peaceful seclusion, but in the morning calm, the little demon flittering in Margot's mind had nowhere to hide. Among the daisy-like weeds growing from the graves, an image of James's face came before her, sunken into a striped bed pillow and smiling with soft words. An unexpected, gentle warmth pressed on her heart. She did miss him. Of course she did. She loved him, but had lost faith that she was ever in love. There was a difference, and Margot and James had tripped into the fissure between. He hadn't hurt her purposefully, and he'd always been quick to apologize after any fight. But by this point, Margot believed to her core that there was no less meaningful word in the standard English language than sorry. If love means never having to say it, then how about loving someone enough to not do anything worth apologizing for in the first place? No, Margot didn't quite regret breaking it off. Everything happened for a reason. She must have done the right thing. If she hadn't, would she be here now, experiencing life anew in a different hemisphere on her own steam? What was tugging at her then, making her feel less whole, more faceless each day? When Rand wasn't at home, she couldn't shake that sensation of being strained through a sieve, dispersing her atoms to meld into the background as she soaked into the carpeting like her spilled wine, or evaporated with her bath water, becoming more and more transparent. All she could do was look around the walls at someone else's books, someone else's photos, wanting to see herself somewhere in them. The closest she ever came was in the mirror. Maybe that was why James, too, had always seemed to look right through her. But how closely had she really looked at him? Always so preoccupied with how she appeared in his eyes, she could no longer see his face as more than a smooth mask. Couldn't recall whether he'd had any birthmarks or even the specific shade of his eyes. In striving to see him, her gaze fell on the headstone in front of her again. She squinted at it while reaching into her purse to put her pen back inside. Damn. She'd just looked a squirrel right in its beady eyes. An unintentional invitation for food she didn't have. When it scampered over to get a closer look at what treats might be in her bag, she stared at the animal blankly and held up her pen as all she had to offer. Useless human with your stick of uselessness, its wee rodent brain must have thought. Next time, she promised, oddly flattered the creature had at least noticed her. She packed up and rose, accidentally knocking over her chai and anointing the dried weeds below with its milky spice. Meh, there, she said to her speckled gray companion. Have yourself a spot of tea, then. The squirrel darted away, leaving Margot to walk until she found another epitaph to jot onto her napkin. After having painfully endured protracted and intensely acute suffering. That's, shockingly informative, Margot thought. Bet she was a huge whiner, and that it didn't cost so much to engrave by the letter back then. Hoping she herself would never suffer in a protracted nor intensely acute manner, Margot looked at another stone. Write me as having loved my fellow man. Sounded more selfless, yet she doubted it. This guy actually asked someone to write that? What an ego. Or maybe he was hiding something, a string of mistakes that no well-intentioned epitaph could make up for. But why should Margot care? He was a stranger from another lifetime whom she would never meet. Yet here she was, wishing he'd lived his life better. She flicked her pen back into her handbag like a dart and stood to walk toward the cemetery's rear gateway. And like every other time she visited, she felt an overwhelming need for the loo by the time she reached this segment of the yard. Next time, she'd skip stopping at the cafe beforehand. Fighting her sudden discomfort, she couldn't help wondering if maybe, instead of the tea, it was her body forcing her to remember that it was still alive, that she should assert that like the tall grass standing proudly and the wildflowers beaming yellow and fuchsia. She sucked the same air as these armies of perseverant life, but related more to the disheveled tombstones, ruptured from their foundations to lean at awkward and inconsistent angles toward and away from each other. These monuments had surrendered to time, allowing the elements to file down their edges and render identities anonymous as decade after decade, the dressed stone returned closer to its natural appearance. Gates of mausoleums rusted away and upper slabs of sarcophagi shifted and chipped, liberating the grass growing inside them. Margot edged closer to a tomb that echoed loudly with buzzing insects. When she peered into its blackness, a cool, ancient scent wafted to her face. Continuing to idle along, she scanned the moss and vines that clung to and devoured the markers sprouting all throughout the garden of marble and granite, the Gothic juxtaposed with the Romanesque, Celtic crosses with Grecian urns. Stopping at another grave, she saw Christmas decor rotting away by her feet. A depressing sight in summer, the winter wreath made her fancy how the cemetery's atmosphere must change with the seasons. She wouldn't be in London long enough to see it burn and rust in gold, the falling leaves mimicking the footfall of a pursuing stranger, and the plucked trees revealing more of the sky and buildings beyond. Yet she could imagine how, on one chill day, that would paint the scene gray. Someone would kneel again at a name of diminishing meaning to the present world and place another wreath of scarlet ribbon and silver baubles, only for it to waste away during the sun and rain of another spring and summer as the cycle continued. Lather, rinse, repeat. The effect of time would be noticeable enough, and somehow she felt she'd already seen it all before and would again, her grandest deja vu yet. To preserve its enchantment, she didn't analyze the reasons why this site had come to matter so much. She felt whole here. That was all to know. But her bladder waited for no man, living or dead. Picking up her pace, Margot hightailed it to the cemetery's rear exit until a shiver clenched the muscles between her shoulder blades. Despite her urgency to get back home, she slowed to a stop in front of a gabled gravestone. An ornate sprig of acacia crowned an inscription she hadn't seen yet. Reader, stay. Underneath this stone doth lie as much beauty as could die, which in life did harbor give to more virtue than doth live. If at all she had a fault, leave it buried in this vault. Rather than grab her pen and napkin to write the poem down, Margot just stood there rereading it, contemplating it. If there was an afterlife, could people really leave their failings behind to putrefy in the dirt, safe from anyone's memory? She liked to think so. Her gaze rose to the name chiseled in the stone. Charlotte Pigeon. It so happened that Charlotte Pigeon was born on the same day as Margot, but her year of birth was 1848 and year of death 1874. Despite all the other gravestones she'd recorded onto her napkin, copying anything down from this one somehow seemed blasphemous. So she just kept standing, with gravity fastening her in place, gawking until a weight on her breastbone made it more difficult to breathe. The sensation was strange, no question. Margot had never felt anything like it. But she'd taken enough psychology courses as an advertising major to peg it for what it was, a psychosomatic response. The conditions were ideal for something like that. For one, the general creepy factor of standing above thousands of corpses as blackbirds crowed their evermores left and right. And now this moving inscription that kicked in her sympathies. There was otherwise no meaning in it, even if the given name made her think of Charlotte sometimes. That wasn't even coincidence enough to add to her diary. She must have seen a dozen Charlottes in that lot alone by now, along with all the Alices, Emmas, and Janes. And so what if their birthdays were the same? The ratio of 365 days to the billions of people ever born on Earth was basically nil. She had to stop pandering to what the human brain did naturally, form correlations when it noted them. Only this and nothing more. Exhausted with her overactive imagination and fantastically bored with herself. She didn't want to stand there anymore, but she didn't want to walk anywhere else either. Breathing heavily through her nose as a numbness dulled her. She didn't want to be anywhere in that moment, not even in her own skin. The effort and futility of life bore down on her as she considered all the bodies underground, all those who'd borne the burden of existence and thought it mattered until they didn't exist or matter anymore, just rotted in boxes under her feet. She had to go back to Rand's. She didn't want to. She needed to. Not for the toilet any longer, but a bath sounded nice. Something that could warm her against the nip of her fears, wash away the soil she felt falling over her, drown the thuds each shovelful made on the lid of her inner casket. That sounded purposeful enough. Forgive my intrusion, Miss Pigeon, she thought. I will leave you to rest in peace.